Hi everyone, welcome to this video about how to find the least common denominator. So I believe that everything in life, including math, is a lot easier when you love yourself. And one of the ways that I like to love myself is to realize where my power is. I can't control other people's choices, and I can't control all of the situations that I end up in. But I can control my own choices, and that is very empowering. So I'd like to encourage you to give yourself a little bit of love, take 2 deep breaths, and let's make this math easy. Okay, so before we learn how to find the least common denominator, let's first talk about what it is. So the purpose of finding the least common denominator is to make it so that you can add and subtract fractions, because adding and subtracting fractions requires the denominators of the fraction to be the same. So if you had something like 2/3 plus 3/5, you wouldn't be able to add those together right off the bat because the denominators are different. And so one possible way that you can find a common denominator is by multiplying the two denominators together. So in this example, if you did 3 times 5, the common denominator would be 15. And then you would find equivalent fractions for each fraction. So you'd say like, okay, 2/3 is equivalent to 10/15. And if you're not sure how I figured that out, you can watch my video about how to find equivalent fractions. But I could do that, and then I could say, okay, 3/5 is equivalent to 9/15. And then after I have the same denominators on both of the fractions, then I could add them together, and that would give me 19/15. And that's the process for adding or subtracting fractions. And it will always work if you multiply the two denominators together, but sometimes there's an easier denominator than if you were to multiply them together. Because if you did 6 times 9, that would give you 54, which is a really big number to have in the denominator. And there's actually an easier number that you could use to subtract these fractions together. And that number is 18. Because if you made the common denominator 18, then 5/6 you could say is equivalent to 15/18. And again, you can watch my equivalent fractions video if you need to understand how I did that. And then 5/9 would be equivalent to 10/18. And then I could subtract those two numbers together, and 15 minus 10 would be 5. And so my answer would be 5/18, which is a lot easier than if I had made the common denominator to be 54. And it also makes it so that I don't have to reduce, or at least I don't have to reduce as much after I figured out what my answer is. And so the least common denominator in that case would be 18. In this last example, where we have 1/2 plus 3/8, the least common denominator in that case would be an 8, because 1/2 is equivalent to 4/8, and 3/8 is obviously equivalent to 3/8 because I didn't do anything to change that. And that makes it really easy to add them together, because I could go 4 plus 3 is 7, and that tells me my answer is 7/8. So the purpose of finding the least common denominator is to make it easy to add and subtract fractions together and then reduce them easily after the fact. So how do we find this least common denominator? How did I know that the least common denominator was 8 or that the least common denominator was 18? The way that you find that is by finding the least common multiple. So there's 2 different ways that you can find the least common multiple, and I'm going to show you both of them, and then you can choose which method you like the most. So the first method is called the list method, where you basically make a list of all of the multiples of each denominator. So if I take the 12 and I list out all the multiples of 12, you're basically skip counting by 12s. So you get 12, 24, 36, 48, etc. And then you do the same thing for the other denominator, which is an 8, and then you look for the ones that they have in common. So in this one, it looks like we have a common multiple of 24. We also have a common multiple of 48, and also it looks like 72. And technically we have an infinite number of common multiples because this list of multiples just keeps going. But the least common multiple is the smallest one that they have in common. So in this problem, the least common multiple would be 24, which means that you would find equivalent fractions with denominators of 24 to add these two fractions together. The other method that you can use to find the least common multiple is to find the prime factorization of both denominators. So if you haven't learned how to do prime factorization, you can watch my video about how to do that. But basically I would say, okay, 12 can be split into the factors 2 and 6. 2 is a prime factor, so I'm not going to split that further. But 6 can be split into 2 and 3. And 2 is prime, and so is 3. So the prime factorization of 12 would be 2 times 2 times 3. And then the prime factorization of 8, if I split that into 4 and 2, 2 is a prime number. If I split 4 up, that gives me 2 and 2. And that means that 8 equals 2 times 2 times 2. And the least common multiple is going to be the number that has all of the prime factors of both numbers. So in order to have the prime factorization for 8, you'd have to have 2 times 2 times 2. And then in order to have the prime factorization for 12, you'd also have to have a 3 in there, because you would have the two 2's and the 3 to get the prime factorization for 12, and then the prime factorization for 8 would be these 3 2's. And so when you multiply all those together, you get 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 again is 8, times 3 would equal 24, and that tells you that your least common multiple is 24. And you can see that we got the same answer for our least common multiple, whether we did the list method for this addition problem or whether we did the prime factors method. So I'm going to do another example of this using a different addition problem. So if I was going to do the list method for this addition problem, I would list out all of the multiples of both of the denominators. So if I start with the 4, I would have 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, 36, 40, and I could keep on going, but I'm going to stop there because I ran out of room. And then I would do the same thing for 18, and I would get 18, 36. 36 plus 18 is 54. 54 plus 18 is 72. And I don't have my 18 times tables memorized, but I can already see that the least common multiple is going to be 36 because they have that one in common. So the list method would tell me the least common multiple is 36. And if I did the prime factors method, I should get the same answer. So if I find the prime factorization of 4, 4 is 2 times 2, and both of those are prime. So the prime factorization of 4 is 2 times 2. Then 18 can be split up into 3 and 6. 3 is prime, but 6 can be split into 2 and 3. And both of those are prime, so that tells me the prime factorization of 18 is 2 times 3 times 3. So the least common multiple has to have 2 2's in it because that would create the prime factorization for 4. And then it also has to have 2 3's in it because the prime factorization of 18 requires a 2 and 2 3's. And so when you multiply all of those prime factors together, 2 times 2 is 4, times 3 is 12, times 3 again is 36. And you can see that we got the same answer for the least common multiple there. So you might be wondering which method is the easiest. Should I use the list method or should I use the prime factors method? And in my opinion, they're both easier depending on which type of problem you have, because the list method is easiest when the numbers that you're trying to find the least common multiple of are numbers that you know the multiples for. So like, for example, when we are finding the least common multiple of 12 and 8, both of those numbers are really easy to make a list for because we have them memorized as part of our times tables. But when you do 18 and 4, the list method isn't as easy because we don't know our 18 times tables. So the prime factors method is easiest for problems like that, where you have really big numbers like 18, or especially if you had numbers in like the hundreds or things like that. You'd probably want to use the prime factors method because it's a lot faster than writing out a list of multiples that you don't have memorized. But if your two numbers are small numbers that are within the times tables, then you might want to use the list method. The prime factors method is also really helpful if you have multiple denominators that you're trying to find the least common denominator for. Because in this example, where we have 3 fractions being added together, you have to find the least common multiple for all 3 numbers, which means if you're trying to use the list method, you need to find a number that all 3 numbers have in common, which can be pretty hard. Because if you look at this, you can say, oh, 15 and 12 both have 60 as a common multiple, but 21 doesn't have 60 as a multiple. Or, 21 and 15 have 105 as a common multiple, but 12 doesn't have 105 as a common multiple. And so the list method can get really clunky if you have multiple fractions that you're trying to add together. So the prime factors method can be a lot easier in that case because it's usually not too hard to find the prime factorization of a number. And once you have the prime factorizations of all those numbers, you can just look at it and say, okay, in order to make 12, I have to have 2 times 2 times 3. And then in order to make 15, I have to have a 3 and a 5. I already have a 3 from the 12, so I can just put in a 5. And then for the 21, I need a 3 and a 7. Again, I already have a 3, so I just need to add in the 7. And that allows me to find the least common multiple. So to find that least common multiple, I would basically just multiply all of those prime factors together. So I'd say 2 times 2 is 4, and then multiply that by 3, that gives me 12. If I multiply 12 by 5, that gives me 60, and 60 times 7 would give me 420. So my least common multiple for these 3 denominators would be 420. And that's how you find the least common denominator, because you basically find the smallest number that's a multiple of both of the denominators. You can do that with the list method, where you list out the multiples of each denominator and find the smallest one they have in common. Or you can use the prime factors method, where you find the prime factorization of each denominator and find the smallest combination of factors that includes all of the factors of each denominator. And that's how you find the least common denominator. I hope this video was helpful for you. Let me know in the comments below how easy it was for you, and then subscribe for more easy math videos. You may also want to check out my fractions playlist to learn more about fractions. And if you'd like more help with your math homework, you can go to mathtutoringonline.com to ask me a question or book a one-on-one tutoring session. See you soon!